As more and more begin to know, the status quo has got to go. They're bound to say yes to a man named Dr. No, a man who makes the establishment panic. Grassroots are growing way too wild, too organic.
So this is a huge article from 972 magazine about an AI system called Lavender that directs Israel's bombing campaign in Gaza. And essentially what it does is it determines with whatever the Israeli military inputs, if certain people are Hamas or Palestinian Islamic Jihad, or whether they're loosely linked to them or if they're, members, and it determines if they're potential targets or not. And this thing has about a 10% rate of error, according to this report. But that didn't matter to the Israeli military. They are bombing whatever targets this thing comes up with without even really double checking. There's no human oversight, really. Formally, the Lavender system is designed to mark all suspected operatives in the military wings of Hamas and Palestinian Islamic Jihad, including low-ranking ones, as potential bombing targets. The sources told 972 that during the first weeks of the war, the army almost completely relied on Lavender, which clocked as many as 37,000 Palestinians as suspected militants and their homes for possible airstrikes. During the early stages of the war, the army gave sweeping approval for officers to adopt Lavender's kill lists with no requirement to thoroughly check why the machine made those choices or to examine the raw intelligence data on which they were based. One source stated that human personnel often served only as a rubber stamp for the machine's decisions, adding that normally they would personally devote only about 20 seconds to each target before authorizing a bombing just to make sure the Lavender-marked target is a male. This was despite knowing that the system makes what are regarded as errors in approximately 10% of cases and is known to occasionally mark individuals who have merely a loose connection to militant groups or no connection at all. Moreover, the Israeli army systematically attacked the targeted individuals while they were in their homes, usually at night while their whole families were present, rather than during the course of military activity. According to the sources, this was because from what they regarded as an intelligence standpoint, it was easier to locate the individuals in their private houses. Additional automated systems. So they have an automated system that is called Where's Daddy? And that was used specifically to track the targeted individuals and carry out bombings when they had entered their family residences. And it's called Where's Daddy? So it's the name of this system that they use to bomb these entire family residences is mocking the children who are being targeted. So the result is that thousands of Palestinians, most of them women and children or people who were not involved in the fighting, were wiped out by Israeli airstrikes, especially during the first weeks of the war, because of the AI program's decisions. One source said, quote, "We were not interested in killing Hamas operatives only when they were in a military building or engaged in a military activity. On the contrary, the IDF bombed them in homes without hesitation. As a first option, it's much easier to bomb a family's home. The system is built to look for them in all these situations," end quote. So again, they get into a lot of detail here, but just one thing I want to mention kind of deep into this investigation is just some of the quotes from the bombing the family homes that are packed with children. The sources who spoke to 972 explained that there was sometimes a substantial gap between the moment that tracking systems like Where's Daddy alerted an officer that a target had entered their house and the bombing itself, leading to the killing of whole families even without hitting the army's target. One source said, quote, "It happened to me many times that we attacked a house, but the person wasn't even home," end quote. And they said that the result is that you killed an entire family for no reason. High-ranking Ukrainian military officers have told Politico that the front lines in Ukraine are at risk of collapsing and that there are no weapons the West could provide to help the situation. These officers, who served under Valery Zaluzhny, the former Ukrainian commander-in-chief, said that Ukrainian lines could collapse wherever Russia decides to focus its offensive. One of the officers said, quote, "There's nothing that can help Ukraine now because there are no serious technologies able to compensate Ukraine for the large mass of troops Russia is likely to hurl at us. We don't have those technologies and the West doesn't have them as well in sufficient numbers." And another officer said that Western weapons would become ineffective. They quickly become ineffective once Russia learns how to counter them. So one official said, quote, "Weapon systems become very redundant quickly because they're quickly countered by the Russians. For example, we use the Storm Shadow and Scalp cruise missiles successfully, but just for a short time. The Russians are always studying. They don't give us a second chance, and they're successful in this," end quote. So as Ukraine, in the face of the defeat on the battlefield, Ukraine has increased its attacks inside Russia, inside Russian territory, drone attacks, sabotage attacks, things like that. And now there was this report from The Guardian quoting officials within Ukraine's military intelligence unit, known as the GUR, threatening that they're going to bomb the Crimean Bridge again for the third time. And again, this risks escalation because Russia views all of these operations as NATO supported, which they are. So this GRU official is saying that they're going to do it in the first half of 2024. They're claiming they're going to take the bridge out entirely, that it won't be able to be repaired. So it's just still this big risk of escalation when it comes to this war is still very real. And the Washington Post and the New York Times both had reports recently about how the CIA basically built up Ukraine's intelligence services after the 2014 coup in Kiev, including the GUR. One official that they quoted said that the GUR was the CIA's little baby that they created into this intelligence force that can carry out these attacks inside Russia. So, it's just incredible how involved the U.S., the CIA, is when it comes to direct attacks on Russia.
Here's Gerald Salenti with today's trends in the news.
Oil prices today, huh? What a surprise. Hit over, it's about almost $91 a barrel for Brent crude. We said this was going to happen as the Israel and Ukraine wars escalate. And it's happening. And as we've noted, if oil prices go up another $40 a barrel, you're going to see the global economy and the equity markets crash. But don't worry about it. It won't mean a thing because the maniacs in charge are going to escalate World War III and annihilate us in a nuclear war. So don't worry about it. You won't have to worry about paying for oil. Life is going to be great after a fucking nuclear war, won't it? Oh, you have the time of your life. Anyway, equity markets down today, 530 points. The Dow keeps going down. Where's it going? Depends on interest rates. Tomorrow, the numbers are coming out about the job numbers in the United States. Again, the whole economy has been artificially propped up with cheap money. When they launched the COVID war, Trump did, all you Trump lovers, the narcissistic Trump. Yeah. March 13th, Black Friday, 2020, state of emergency. Lock down everything. But here's free money. Don't worry about it. Hey, bring those interest rates down to zero. Keep pumping up the bigs. Let's make it out everything's okay. Yeah, we got inflation, and it ain't going away. U.S. trade gap widens to nearly $70 billion. Oh, and you got a trade deficit approaching $35 trillion, and the debt level going up $1 trillion every 100 days. Why can't understand why people are buying gold? Blows me away. Layoffs hit 14-month high in March. And this is according to Challenger Gray and Christmas. More than 90,000 people lost their jobs in March, making it the month with the highest number of cuts from U.S.-based employers since January of 2023. Each week in your Trends Journal, we've been having, this I think is about the 79th or 80th week of us listing job cuts and businesses going out of business. The worst is yet to come. And again, no one's talking about the banks going bust and the office building bust. Again, all in your Trends Journal. Fund giants eyed over bank stakes. This is an article in the Wall Street Journal yesterday. Banking regulators are scrutinizing whether index fund giants BlackRock, Vanguard, and State Street are sticking to passive roles when it comes to their investments in U.S. banks. Remember, I said we're going to see a banking crisis. There's going to be defaults on commercial real estate like you've never seen. The office building bust is real. It's happening. The latest data is showing the office vacancy rates in the United States in the largest cities it is 20%. New York City's 23%. Portland, Oregon's 29%. Depending on the numbers you're looking at, San Francisco, Suck Francisco, is down. It's between 25 to 30%. Vacant. Occupancy rate, 51%, according to Castle Systems. So going back to this, the banks. The three firms, you ready? Manage more than $23 trillion in total, with much of it in funds that passively mimic indexes such as the S&P 500. BlackRock and Vanguard each hold more than 10% of the shares at many banks. 23 trillion. Look who's running the world. Grow the fuck up. BlackRock. BlackRock. Yeah. Hey, I'm Fink. I'm a Fink. Fink's running it. Yeah, no Fink, man. There's a crime syndicate that's running the fucking country. Again, the banksters are going to go bust. But don't worry, the Federal Reserve, when it went bust back in 2007 to 2010, they pumped in, the Federal Reserve, $29 trillion to bail out their buddies. Fuck you. You foreclose on your house. We don't give a fuck about you. We don't give a fuck about you. All the money goes to us. We're the banksters. NATO summit in Brussels prepares massive escalation of war on Russia. Russia and NATO already in direct confrontation, the Kremlin said. I said this today. They said that the bloc itself is already involved in the Ukraine conflict. NATO continues to move towards our borders, expanding its military infrastructure toward our borders. In fact, our relations have now descended to the level of direct confrontation, and this is according to the Kremlin spokesman. World War III has started. And that guy, that Tusk, the Polish prime minister, remember on early in March, first week of March, he said that the pre-war era was over. He just came out with that again. Polish Prime Minister Donald Tusk has warned that the real threat of conflict in Europe, saying that you got to prepare for war. Our job is to nurture transatlantic, blah, blah, blah. He goes, you ready? He said that if Kyiv loses, no one in Europe will feel safe. Total fucking
bullshit.
Live from Run Your Mouth World Headquarters. It's today's Run Your Mouth.
Oregon is recriminalizing drugs. Here's what Portland learned. And I just want to say off the bat, the fact that Portland blew this for the rest of us is not proof that legalized drugs won't work. The fact that you went to the worst city in America that was already having a tremendous amount of problems, and then you tried to legalize drugs, and it wasn't even like the fun drugs. It wasn't like people are going to be outside taking mushrooms and learning like, oh, maybe I should do something with my life. Or it's not like people were doing cocaine and then being like, you know what? I could do better than this tent. Let me go talk to that other homeless guy. Maybe we can get a business going. And then they start talking about business plans and getting excited about doing something. They weren't taking those kind of drugs, or they weren't even like smoking weed and then helping the economy by somebody purchasing all the donuts that were out there. No, they're doing fentanyl. That's not a drug that's going to help people get their shit together. And don't tell me that we can't be having clean cocaine to help us be making better Run Your Mouths because the people out in Portland blew it for all of us doing fentanyl in their tents. You can't take the people that already don't have their shit together, go, oh, well, we tried we tried clean drugs with these people and it didn't work. So no one's going to be able to have access to clean drugs. By the way, did they even have like clean drugstores on the corner, or were they just buying fentanyl from the other tents? So I'm just saying, let's not take this as the example of, oh, look, legalizing drugs don't work because you went to the worst city in America that was already falling apart and then you tried it and it didn't work. Now, it seems to me like recriminalizing drugs with homeless drug addicts is going to be tough to prosecute, because when you bring them to court and they're like, yeah, I didn't know you changed the law. I was outside doing drugs. I've been outside doing drugs. What, you told me? What, when I was passed out on Thursday? You can't, and ignorance of the law is no excuse for not holding the law. Yeah, well, good luck retraining these people that you told that they could be outside doing fentanyl, that they can no longer just be outside doing fentanyl. Good luck with that one. Good luck with that transition. You start, when are you going to go tent to tent? You go tent to tent, you give it a knock, and you try and unzip the guy's tent and give him a notice. Hey, listen, starting next week, you can't be out here doing those drugs anymore. And now this is fun. Apparently, they're going to have a hard time reinstituting this because they don't have enough public defenders available to defend these people. If you guys were afraid of pollution and global warming, good news, we're going to pollute the skies to make it better. If you guys were concerned that the world was going to go to shit and that because of carbon, which, has always existed in the environment and, creates trees, and there seems to be this natural balance between carbon dioxide and the plant life on the planet, where we put more carbon dioxide in and then the trees grow bigger and then you end up with more oxygen. Seems like a pretty great system. But if you guys were afraid of that carbon thing, don't worry. Scientists are figuring out other bullshit chemicals that they can put into the sky to block out the sun, because we got to counterbalance what's going on with the carbon. This is from the New York Times. Infusing clouds with sulfur dioxide. I'm sure that's better for the environment. Isn't sulfur dioxide the thing that smells like farts? Isn't that the eggy fart smell you get when you go to like really poor areas, or like you go out to Staten Island? They got all those old dumps down there. Isn't that what sulfur dioxide is? Infusing clouds with sulfur dioxide to block the sun, vacuuming carbon dioxide out of thin air, adding iron to the ocean to draw greenhouse gases down to the seafloor. As recently as a few years ago, technologies designed to change the Earth's atmosphere, what is broadly known as geoengineering, were considered too impractical, too expensive, and too outlandish to be taken seriously. But as I write in a new article, some of these technologies are being deployed. One is already in place. The effects of climate change are becoming worse, and nations aren't meeting their collective goals of slashing greenhouse gas emissions. The stakes are very real. Last year was the hottest in modern history. Oceans around the world are shockingly warm. Floods, fires, and droughts are growing more intense. We have no choice but to take matters into our own hands. Israel faces massive diplomatic backlash over airstrike that killed Americans, 6 other aid workers. Netanyahu's like, dude, we're bombing civilians here all the time. How are we supposed to know? We're bombing all over the place. We were supposed to know that those were the aid workers bringing in food. I mean, how were we supposed to know? You know how many people were bombing in Gaza? If anything, you guys are getting in the way of us trying to get to Hamas by being there. We're trying to bomb the whole area, and you guys are sending in food and making it that we can't bomb in certain places. How's that supposed to work? And here's a picture, and I guess it was so out in the middle of the road, they couldn't be like, yeah, but there were tunnels underneath. The main infrastructure was right underneath this thing. I heard that donkey over there was working for Hamas. We couldn't not strike this thing. And anyway, you guys if you're giving out food, it's going to be to future terrorists. And so we can't be having you guys, I mean, we stand for the civilians of Gaza. We're trying to help them out as much as anybody else. But if you're in there feeding them, that's going to be someone that we have to fight in the future. So obviously this incident was particularly tragic. Is the World Central Kitchen is, I think, now pulling out of the area. Hold on. So not a great look for Israel because kind of showcases, hey, how indiscriminately are you bombing inside of these areas that you manage to hit these people? Or are you specifically targeting aid agencies that are coming in because you guys are actually trying to create problems in the area, targeting civilians so that they have to suffer as well and will not have access to food? Another article from the New York Times, Israel bombed an Iranian embassy complex. Is that allowed? I enjoyed this one because you're talking about war here, and we're talking about the prospect of Israel going to war with Iran. And as I'm reading this article, they're basically describing war like freeze tag, where it's like, listen, you can't strike the guy while he's at base. If he's in an embassy, that's base. We all decided that base is safe. You can't be attacking the guy while he's at his base. Sure, he could be your mortal enemy, and he could be the leader of the people and a better person to strike than the random civilians within a territory. But if he's in base, we all agreed, no base. And now that you struck the guy while he's at base, that means that we're it. And so we got to figure out how to attack you guys back. You understand? Warfare is just a big old game of freeze tag. The leaders get to stay at base, and you're not allowed to strike the base because that's the rules of the game. But then if you strike them, then they're it, and they got to get you back so that you're it. And then it goes back and forth with escalating conflict, while in truth, no one actually really wants a war. This was from the Wall Street Journal opinion section. And firstly, the first stat I think everyone here should know is that 63% of all audits target taxpayers under $200,000 a year. I don't know how many of you guys in the audience are making $200,000 plus a year or above 150. But, I don't know. I should get a subscriber bracket for you fine people. Go buy Mario Kratom and Sheets. You guys can afford it. But anyways, for all that talk of audits over $400,000, don't worry. I'm not going after you. 63% of audits are for people making under $200,000 a year. And here was the other thing, though, which sounded interesting, is that working for the IRS, it's a pretty good job. It's paying 6 figures a year. They'll forgive a whole lot of your student debt. But guess what? A lot of people, they don't want that job. They don't want to be a Fed looking through your money, deciding how much money you owe to the government, which showcases that anyone that does go work at the IRS as an auditor is a true sociopath. And that also we should continue to apply shame to these people because that seems to work, as they're having a tough time recruiting people to do the job.
Your daily dose of liberty education starts here. The Tom Woods Show.
Every single speech, he's talking about deficit zero. He's explaining the problems. It's not him, just him. It's his Ministry of Economy. It's everybody in his administration. That's the power of his party, actually. His party was actually established 2 years ago. 2 years ago, that's it. The Libertarian Party, basically. And their whole thing is reaching out with social media and being fun and entertaining. And that's why Malay was so big. And his whole thing, once he's got into office, every single day, he gets interviews almost every single day with anybody possible. And he's always like, here's our problems. We have a big deficit. Our central bank liabilities are terrible. And here's our problems. And I've heard from multiple people that you go on the street in Argentina, you can ask anybody and they'll tell you that budget deficit, they know what a budget deficit is. They know what money printing is, and they know the problems of the country. And that's largely because Malay talks about it all the time, and everybody wants to know what's going on in the economy. So even his opponents have to start speaking in his language because that's all he talks about. And they'll be like, oh, they'll come up with these things and but they start speaking in his language about the budget deficit, the money printing, et cetera, et cetera. So
well,
it's kind of amazing what's happening there as far as the education of the people.
Yeah, that's what we really need. That's very important. So I couldn't help noticing a parallel with Ron Paul, that both of these gentlemen got their interest piqued in politics because of a dramatic moment in monetary policy or the history of the money in the country. And I wonder if the analogy or if the comparison can be made even more robust by the demographic of the followers. Because for Ron Paul, it was notorious that he was reaching younger people. Now, does that still hold even in Argentina?
Oh yeah, actually, that's what caused him to win. He got 70% of the vote under 24. It's
Wow.
actually older people that are more against Milei that just don't understand what he's talking about. He got 70% of the people over it. And what's funny, Tom, is the Kirchners, the previous party, lowered the voting age to 16, thinking that it would basically give them permanent wins. And guess what happened? The people they lowered the voting age to 16. Right? The people under 18 almost unanimously voted for Milei. So it totally backfired on him because he's like this rock star. He's so fun. And you watch his social media and stuff. It is really fun and it's a little edgy. I mean, you look at his opponent's social media and it's like photo ops and it's so boring. And that's his innovation of his party and him is to totally be fun and exciting. And he really excites the young people.
Yeah, you know, but
like Ron Paul.
What I can't get is how many young people in the U.S. are watching like geriatric social media. They're watching some of the most uninspiring, robotic human beings ever to walk this earth, and they're just going to go vote for them. Whereas in Argentina, they're saying, well, you know, maybe those aren't the people I want to vote for. Now, it's true. We don't have quite the personality that he is. And it is true that somebody who has that kind of presence and charisma and that arouses curiosity about himself, like who on earth could this person be, regardless of the content of what he's saying, I think has a tendency to draw people because people will feel like they're part of something big and popular. And unfortunately, that's what people want more than anything is to be part of something. It's great to want to be part of something big, but there is that instinct to want to be part of the cool group. And if our side suddenly becomes the cool group, well, then interesting things can happen.
Right. And also, the economy is so bad in Argentina that these kids just don't see a future there. It is so hard to get a job there. We're talking 200% inflation in 2023. So a lot of these kids, it was either Milei or we're out. We're leaving the country. And one of the reasons he won is they convinced their parents and their grandparents to also vote for Milei.
Wow.
So that's one of the reasons he won is and he was the only person. If you watch the debates as I did, Tom, it was like the country wasn't even going through an economic crisis with the other people. Milei was the only person talking about inflation, talking about all the issues that affect everyday Argentinians. In fact, his opponent, Massa, his solution to inflation was a central bank digital currency.
Oh, jeez.
Yeah, that was his solution to inflation was a central bank digital currency.
So, wow, talk about being tone deaf.
Right. And even the center right party, she basically, the other two parties, she was talking about insecurity, crime, and the problems of the unions, which is important, but she knew nothing about economics or anything. So she wasn't talking about inflation either. And it was only Milei that was talking about these issues. And that resonated with these kids. They're like, this guy's actually speaking our language. And Milei was the only one that was speaking against the lockdowns, against the jab, the COVID vaccine mandates, et cetera, and all these other people. It was like, there's no problem. In fact, in Buenos Aires, they're doing a documentary about how great their decision was to lock down. And Argentina had the worst lockdowns in the world. They're talking about how heroic was their decision to decide to lock down.
Stupid. It didn't even do anything. I mean, how can you still believe in any of this?
It killed, in Argentina, it was devastating.
Yeah, I mean, when I say it didn't do anything, it didn't do anything good, is what I mean. Oh, yeah.
It was devastating and devastating. Everybody knows it, too, because it's a poor country that you're locking down. It makes it 10 times worse than the United States, which we have wealth.
You know, your title's perfect, and we understand it. But in my mind, I want to insert a couple words. You say last rights, and I want to say how to avoid the death of American liberty. And I think really that's what part of your goal is. That's why we talk about it. But this is catchy because I'm afraid there's so much truth to what you say. But I wanted to see if I could get you to compare these terrible conditions that we have today and that you're writing about. And we're talking about the death of liberty and last rights. And when you look at it, you could write a whole book on all the problems we have. And every day, Daniel and I don't have any trouble finding something that we say, here's another thing, this is dumb. But we always try to look around and say, what are we doing about it? The fact that we can still write books and get on, on the internet, we are able to get a message out, and things were worse at other times. But I wanted you to compare, if you can, what it's like today and how we assess it with the other difficult periods we have. You say, well, we don't have to talk about the Civil War anymore. We don't have to talk about World War I.
That's good.
Yeah, World War II and all this, but people would say, well, but we got by. But of course, from my viewpoint, I think it was always a little less liberty, and this has been eroding it. But how do you make this comparison? Do you think there was a time when it was very similar and we were on the ropes?
Yeah, there were several times like that in American history. If you look at certainly the Civil War period and the period after the war, it was a complete mess. So much tyranny that was running rampant. And if you look at the First World War, you got Woodrow Wilson acting like he's the world czar to save democracy and suppressing freedom of the press and dragging us into a nonsensical war. Great Depression, you've got the Roosevelt administration creating new government agencies by the bucketful, and the Supreme Court took a dive as far as putting, mandating due process and protecting rights. Second World War, you had the Japanese Americans rounded up for concentration camps. You had a lot of other bad things. There have been a lot of bad things throughout American history, off and on, that America bounced back from. Part of my concern is that there was a spirit of liberty. There's a love of liberty, and that's something, Dr. Paul, which I appreciate that you've done. Your speeches on college campuses, things like that. You have reached young folks and helped awaken their minds and their spirits about the value of liberty. But what I'm not seeing so much right now among young people is that same passion. I mean, I've seen more passion to have federal student loans forgiven than to put a leash on the federal government, and that's concerning. There was a poll a few months ago that showed that almost a third of people in their 20s would support mandatory government surveillance cameras inside of private homes in order to prevent domestic violence. Now, people like that, I mean, they are beyond redemption. I mean, let's have triage here. If someone wants to have mandatory surveillance cameras in your bedroom, it's like, I don't think I'm going to be able to reach you.
As someone who's been a working journalist for many decades, how do you see journalism has changed now in our digital era?
There are fewer barriers to entry, which is a good thing, but the standards have fallen. It's difficult to find editors who enjoy seeing someone vigorously beat up the government. I mean, it was different when I was starting out in the 80s and most of the 90s. The editors would enjoy a story that raised a ruckus and got a bunch of angry letters to the editor, and maybe had the federal agency chief writing an angry response. There are still some editors like that, but the journalism profession has become a lot more deferential. I mean, you have a whole lot more people who have journalism degrees, but what they don't teach you in journalism school is to be a junkyard dog fighting the government when the government's lying, withholding documents. And most of the journalists are so deferential. Most journalists are satisfied to write "the government told me so" stories. Yeah. And this is poison for freedom and putting a leash on government. I'm just always amazed at how much BS politicians and the federal agencies get away with in D.C. Some days it almost makes me cynical.
Somehow, I don't know, maybe you have some suggestions to break away from this idea of Team Red versus Team Blue and start thinking about Team Freedom.
Those are great points and great questions. I mean, it's frustrating to me to look back even in the 1990s when there was a lot more talk about freedom. I mean, the 1990s looks like practically a golden age of freedom compared to nowadays. And it's frustrating to see the terms of the debate for the 2024 presidential race. Neither Biden nor Trump say much about individual freedom. I mean, I think the only freedom that Biden cares about is the freedom to terminate pregnancies. Trump is good on the right to bear arms and some other things, but there's far more passion for political power, to seize political power, than there is for individual freedom, and that's a perversion. It's been over 40 years since a major party presidential candidate spoke eloquently and sincerely about freedom. We've got to go back to Ronald Reagan in 1980. And this is a sign of how far the country's fallen. But to go back to your point, Daniel, I'm not completely pessimistic. I certainly try to get a lot of comic relief in everything I write because people who laugh haven't given up hope. But things are looking grim. Things have looked worse elsewhere in the past. But it's getting later and later. And, the plane is getting closer to crashing. So,
both sides, Democrats and Republicans, because they get the most attention so far in this election, and both of them will say something very similar. And that is, this is the most significant election in all of our history. This is all the difference in the world. But, they usually say that unless you vote Democrat or unless you vote Republican. And they don't see it, I'm sure, the way most of the libertarians see it, because it's such a mixed bag. If you want to, both sides on occasion talk in the right manner about liberty and freedom. They'll come down, maybe once out of 10 times, they'll come down on the right side of an issue. But most of the time, I think that my point has always been they think it's going to change things for the better because they're going to get elected. And I've always argued the case. Well, the many elections that the first election I remember was 1940, and there was a lot of excitement because my dad was interested in listening to the news, and it was always going to be a difference. Back then, it was getting rid of Roosevelt and that kind of stuff. So it's something that they expect to come. And my argument is, eventually, afterwards, nothing really changes. I'm looking to the Fed. I'm looking to the foreign policy that we have, personal liberty, the whole thing, everything that we talk about. So nothing changes, and that's why I don't have a lot of confidence in bipartisanship. One word that I detest is bipartisanship. We might get together. I say, yeah, bring all your bad eyes together and throw them in the middle and deceive the people further.